Wait, this didn't seem like an interview for a palace companion position. The healer's assistant looked at Dana with clinical detachment and explained. This was a routine examination for a surrogate mother for Alpha King Larry Davies. It was all written in the contract. No, 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 Dana's world tilted. Her stepmother referred her here as a lady's companion. Not this. She clutched the contract with shaking hands, staring at the words surrogacy agreement stamped across the top in the official royal seal. What dark secret led Dana to this moment? Dive into her story to uncover the truth and discover the Alpha King who will stop at nothing to claim his fated mate. Subscribe for more stories like this. One week earlier, Dana had watched children play at the orphanage, longing desperately for a family of her own. She'd been an orphan before her father adopted her, and having a baby was the only thing she'd ever truly wanted. But they were drowning in debt since her father's death. When Dana asked Kathleen when they could afford a family, her stepmother's expression shifted, calculating. She knew of a companion position at the royal palace. Generous pay, enough to clear their debts. Easy work. Kathleen had already arranged everything. Dana never suspected the truth. In the throne room, Alpha King Larry stood firm against Elder Watson's pressure. Some surrogate candidates had been sent for examination, but Larry refused to steal a child from women who didn't fully understand what they were agreeing to. He wanted them released immediately. Elder Watson's patience snapped. The kingdom needed an heir announced by New Year's, or rival packs would start circling. Meanwhile, Dana backed toward the examination chamber door, panic rising. This was a mistake. She never intended to be a surrogate. Kathleen couldn't have. The guards blocked her escape. The contract was signed. She was palace property now. Dana tried to run. Then the chamber doors exploded open, and Alpha King Larry Davies entered and his entire world stopped. His wolf erupted. The beast inside him that had been silent for over a century roared to life with devastating recognition. My mate, she exists. Larry staggered, eyes flashing pure gold. It had been over a century since a fated mate bond manifested in the royal bloodline. But here she was, this terrified woman, her scent flooding his senses like moonlight and wild honey, driving his wolf absolutely mad with need. His voice came out as a growl that made everyone submit instinctively. Bring her to me, now. The surrogacy agreement was void. Sacred mate law superseded everything. She was his fated mate, and he would protect her from anyone who tried to use or harm her, including the stepmother who'd sold her. Chapter 1. The Alpha King's Protection. The emergency council convened at dawn. Dana stood behind Larry's throne, exposed and vulnerable. As the kingdom's most powerful wolves filed in, Elder Watson's expression was thunderous. The others whispered, staring at her with open judgment. Larry rose, his presence commanding absolute silence. His declaration came with the force of ancient law. Dana Murray was protected under the kingdom's highest sacred statute, the fated mate bond. The surrogacy agreement was void. Anyone attempting to enforce it would face execution for violating sacred mate law. The council erupted. A fated mate? After over a century? But Larry wasn't finished. He demanded Kathleen Moore's presence immediately. Kathleen arrived an hour later in fine clothes purchased with blood money, expecting negotiation. She wasn't prepared for the Alpha King's rage. Larry descended from his throne, his dominance rolling over the room like a physical wave. Kathleen dropped to her knees, unable to stand under the pressure. He asked one simple question: did she understand what she'd done? She'd sold her stepdaughter into reproductive servitude. Kathleen stammered excuses. Just business. Dana would have been compensated. The girl wanted a child anyway, so what did it matter? Larry's eyes flashed pure gold. What did it matter? She'd exploited trauma, forged consent through deception, and commodified Dana's body for profit. Worse, she'd done it to family. The judgment was swift and absolute. Kathleen was stripped of her late husband's estate. Every coin from the surrogacy contract would be seized. She was banished from the capital under pain of death. If she ever returned, she'd be executed on sight. For trafficking in sacred mate bonds, Kathleen's face went white. She tried to beg, but the guards dragged her out before she could speak. Dana watched in stunned silence. She'd expected an apology, maybe a fine, not this total devastation. When the chamber cleared, Larry turned to her. She was his fated mate, protected by every sacred law, but he wouldn't force her into anything. She had a choice: stay in the palace under his protection, or leave with funds and a safe residence. But she needed to know the entire kingdom now knew she'd been sold. Without his protection, there would be wolves who'd see her as prey. The choice was hers, but he hoped she'd stay. Dana looked at this powerful king who'd just demolished her stepmother's life to defend her. She didn't trust him. How could she trust anyone? But she had nowhere else to go. She'd stay, but he needed to understand. She wasn't staying because of some mystical mate bond. She was staying because she had no other option. Trust? He'd have to earn that. Larry's slight smile suggested he'd expected nothing less. Fair enough. He had time. Chapter 2. The Political Vulture's Circle. Elder Watson returned 3 days later with a breathtaking woman. Dark hair cascading over emerald silk, amber eyes calculating everything. Casey Nell, Larry's former lover, moved through the palace like she still belonged there. The emergency council session was called without Dana's knowledge. William L. Jones, head guard, quietly escorted her to the chamber. He advised her to stay silent, this was going to get ugly. Elder Watson wasted no time, challenging Larry's mate bond announcement. Sacred law protected fated mates, yes, but the kingdom's needs superseded personal desires. They needed a proven heir immediately. Without a clear bloodline, rival packs would challenge their sovereignty within the year. Another council member spoke up, emboldened. The Alpha King's wolf going feral for a nobody orphan didn't change their political reality. The girl had no pack, no status, no value. How did claiming her serve the kingdom? Casey rose gracefully, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. She understood Larry's instinctive reaction, but perhaps there was compromise? The original surrogacy plan could proceed. Dana would carry the heir, securing the succession. Once the child was born, Larry could formally claim Dana as mate if he still wished. The bond would remain intact, just delayed. Dana felt physically ill. They were discussing her like livestock again. Larry's response was immediate and absolute. No. The answer was no, would always be no. And if the council brought this up again, heads would roll. Dana was his fated mate, future queen. The heir would come naturally from their genuine bond, not forced surrogacy. That violated everything sacred. The chamber descended into chaos. Half supported Larry, the other half sided with Elder Watson. Personal feelings couldn't endanger the kingdom's stability. Elder Watson raised his hand for silence. His compromise wasn't negotiable. Dana and Larry must cohabitate in the king's private quarters immediately. Live as mates. Prove the bond's legitimacy to the kingdom. Dana heard the real message. They wanted her under constant surveillance, controlled, contained where they could monitor her every move. Larry saw the trap, but couldn't refuse without doubting the bond himself. He agreed with barely concealed fury. Dana would move into his quarters that evening, but she was his mate and future queen, not a prisoner. Casey smiled serenely, as if she'd won. The orphan girl was clearly out of her depth. This would resolve itself soon enough. Dana stood frozen. She was being moved into the Alpha King's chambers, forced into intimate proximity with a man she barely knew. While the kingdom's most powerful wolves plotted to use her body for their political games, William appeared at her side, sympathetic. Pack her things. The king's quarters were in the North Tower. He'd ensure her safety. Dana nodded numbly. She'd agreed to stay for protection. She never imagined protection would feel so much like a gilded cage. Chapter 3. An orphan in a palace. The king's quarters were impossibly vast. Marble floors, ancient tapestries, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the kingdom. Dana stood clutching her single bag of belongings, feeling like an intruder in a museum. Larry had given her the eastern wing, 3 rooms including a private bedroom. She could lock the doors. Her space was hers alone. He wouldn't intrude without permission. But sharing quarters with the Alpha King, no matter how many locked doors separated them, felt like living inside a cage made of gold and moonlight. She'd gone from betrayed stepdaughter to mate of the Alpha King in less than a week. But she didn't feel like a mate. She felt like a political pawn being moved around a board she didn't understand. The first 3 nights, they barely spoke. Larry would return from council meetings late, exhausted and frustrated. Dana would hear him moving through the main chamber, sense his wolf's restless energy. But she stayed locked in her rooms, afraid of the intimacy forced proximity demanded. On the 4th night, she couldn't sleep. The palace was too quiet, too strange. She ventured into the shared sitting area, and found Larry at the windows, staring out at the moonlit kingdom. He didn't turn when she entered, but his voice was gentle. She didn't have to hide from him. This was her home now too. Dana found herself asking the question haunting her. Why? Did he really stop the surrogacy plan? The council was right, he needed an heir. She could have provided that without all this complication. Larry finally turned, his expression raw with something like pain. He'd been prepared to go through with it because duty demanded it, but the moment he'd seen her in that examination chamber, terrified and betrayed, his wolf had recognized something he'd stopped believing in. Fate could be kinder than politics. He couldn't steal a child from his own mate. He couldn't reduce her to a vessel when she was meant to be his equal. The admission was so genuine that Dana's carefully maintained walls cracked slightly. She confessed she'd spent 15 years in the orphanage before her father adopted her. She knew what it felt like to be nobody's choice, to watch other children get selected while she remained. That longing for family had made her vulnerable, made her easy for Kathleen to exploit. Larry moved closer slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. He understood that burden more than she realized. Being Alpha King meant everyone wanted something from him. His power, his bloodline, his authority. No one had ever just wanted him. The crown was its own kind of orphanage, surrounded by people, but fundamentally alone. They talked through the night. Their stories were different, but the ache underneath was the same. A desperate need to matter to someone, to be chosen rather than used. As dawn broke, Dana realized something unsettling. Larry wasn't the monster she'd feared. He was trapped just like her, struggling against expectations and duty, trying to find something real in a world built on political transactions. But that realization was terrifying, because trust was dangerous. Kathleen had seemed kind too once, so when Larry asked if they could try to build something genuine, Dana agreed, but she made no promises. Her emotional walls remained intact, fortified by betrayal, and the haunting certainty that she was just an obligation. A mate bond fate had forced upon him, not a woman he'd chosen freely. Chapter 4. The Queen Who Never Was. Casey Nell's campaign began with surgical precision. A misplaced invitation left Dana arriving underdressed to a diplomatic dinner, while every noble wore ceremonial robes. The whispers started immediately. The future queen didn't understand basic court protocol. Dana tried to learn. She requested an etiquette instructor, and was assigned Mistress Vera, who seemed helpful at first. But every lesson was sabotaged. Vera taught wrong forms of address, incorrect protocols, outdated customs that made Dana look foolish. 3 humiliating public mistakes before Dana realized the instruction was deliberately wrong. Casey was always nearby during these incidents, perfectly sympathetic. She'd sweep in to rescue Dana, correcting her errors with gracious condescension. That made the failure even more obvious. The message was clear. Casey belonged here. Dana didn't. Rumors spread like poison. Dana's common blood made her unsuitable for the crown. She was an orphan playing dress-up, a nobody who'd gotten lucky through biological chance. Some whispered darker things, that she'd tricked the Alpha King, used forbidden magic to manufacture a false mate bond. The court divided sharply. Older nobles who remembered ancient traditions supported the sacred fated mate bond, but others, particularly those aligned with Elder Watson and the Nell Pack, openly mocked her. They'd make cutting remarks just loud enough for her to hear, laugh when she entered rooms, treat her like an amusing curiosity. The court began calling her the ghost queen, present but powerless. The breaking point came during a formal reception. Casey accidentally spilled wine on Dana's gown, a gift from Larry, one of the few nice things she owned. The stain was permanent, and Casey's sickeningly sweet apology made clear it was intentional. Dana stood there, humiliated and helpless, while nobles laughed behind their hands. That's when William L. Jones intervened. The head guard had been watching Dana's struggles, and her quiet dignity reminded him of his own sister, another woman the court had tried to break. He approached her with an unexpected offer. If she wanted to survive, she needed to learn the real rules, the hidden power dynamics that actually controlled the palace. William became her unlikely ally, teaching her which nobles could be trusted, how to read political currents, explaining that Casey's power came from perception. If Dana wanted to fight back, she needed to be smarter, not louder. Dana began observing rather than reacting. She researched correct protocols herself, responded to cutting remarks with grace, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. Slowly, she developed a reputation for quiet cunning, and Casey, watching her campaign lose effectiveness, realized she'd underestimated the orphan girl. This would require more drastic measures. Chapter 5. The heir changes everything. Dana knew something was different before the palace healers confirmed it. Her wolf felt restless, protective of her own body in a way she'd never experienced. The morning sickness started 3 weeks after she'd moved into Larry's quarters, and the scent changes were impossible to hide. From a palace full of wolves with supernatural senses, the head healer delivered the news with reverent awe. Dana was pregnant with the Alpha King's child, a true heir, conceived through the fated mate bond. It was a blessing the kingdom hadn't seen in over a century. When Larry heard, his reaction was primal and immediate. His wolf surged forward with such fierce protectiveness that his eyes flashed gold for a full minute. He pulled Dana into his arms, despite her surprise, his whole body trembling with overwhelming emotion. An heir, their child, the family she'd always dreamed of was growing inside her, real and undeniable. The public announcement sent shockwaves through the kingdom. The mate bond had produced an heir, which by ancient law legitimized Dana's position beyond any political challenge. The succession was secured. The bloodline continued. Dana wasn't just the Alpha King's fated mate anymore. She was the mother of the future ruler. Larry made his declaration before the entire court the next day. Dana would be formally recognized as queen consort immediately, with the full mate ceremony to follow after the child's birth. Anyone who questioned her position would be challenging, not just him, but the future of the kingdom itself. His voice carried absolute authority, and even Elder Watson couldn't argue against the weight of sacred law and royal succession combined. The nobles who'd mocked Dana as an orphan playing dress-up suddenly shifted their treatment. She was carrying the heir. That changed everything. Some genuinely warmed to her, seeing the pregnancy as proof of fate's blessing. Others simply recognized that opposing her now was politically suicidal. But in the shadows, Keishi's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. She watched the announcement from the back of the throne room, her amber eyes filled with cold calculation and barely suppressed rage. This was supposed to be her position, her child, her crown. The orphan had stolen everything. Elder Watson pulled Casey aside after the ceremony, his expression grim. Their window to interfere was closing rapidly. Once the child was born, the bond would be unbreakable. The kingdom would never accept removing a mother from her newborn heir. They needed leverage, and they needed it immediately. Casey already had a plan forming. Dana's background was suspiciously blank. An orphan with no records before age 5, adopted by a minor pack member who'd conveniently died. That blankness was either meaningless or extremely valuable. They needed to investigate her unknown parentage, find scandals buried in her past, discover anything that could be used to discredit her. Before the birth made her untouchable, Elder Watson assigned his most discreet investigators to the task. They'd dig into every orphanage record, every adoption document, every fragment of Dana's forgotten childhood. There had to be something. A disgraced bloodline, criminal relatives, evidence of common blood that would shame the royal lineage. Anything to prove she was unworthy of the crown she now carried. Meanwhile, Casey began planting different seeds. She whispered concerns to influential nobles. Was it really wise to celebrate so quickly? Pregnancies could be complicated, especially for common-born wolves. And wasn't it suspicious how conveniently this heir appeared? Right when Dana's position was most threatened. Some wolves were capable of terrible deceptions when desperate for power. The rumors were subtler now, more dangerous because they carried the veneer of concerned prudence, rather than obvious malice. And they spread through the court like smoke, invisible, but choking. Larry noticed the shift, but couldn't identify the source. He increased Dana's guard detail, insisted she rest more, practically growled at anyone who approached her, with anything less than absolute respect. His protectiveness was overwhelming and touching, but Dana could sense the desperation underneath. She was carrying the heir that secured everything, which meant she'd also become the target that threatened everything. And somewhere in the palace, enemies she couldn't see were searching for the weapon that would destroy her. Chapter 6. The Traitor's True Cost. Dana found the letters by accident. She'd been sorting through the possessions recovered from Kathleen's residence, items that legally belonged to her father's estate, and had been returned after Kathleen's banishment. Most of it was meaningless, but tucked inside an old ledger, she discovered correspondence that made her blood run cold. The letters were between Kathleen and someone signed only as Jagal. The handwriting was unmistakably Jerry's, her former fiancé, the man she'd trusted before Kathleen's betrayal. But these letters predated their engagement by months. They detailed a plan, carefully orchestrated and coldly calculated. Jerry hadn't just helped Kathleen sell Dana for debt money. He'd been paid by a rival faction, wolves aligned with the Northern Territories who wanted to destabilize Larry's succession. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Introduce a common surrogate with no political connections, who could be easily controlled or eliminated. If she produced an heir, the child would be vulnerable to manipulation. If she failed, the succession crisis would continue, weakening Larry's authority. Either outcome served their purposes. Dana had been a weapon aimed at the kingdom before she'd even signed the contract. Jerry's courtship, his promises of family, his entire relationship with her had been a lie, designed to make her desperate and controllable. She brought the letters to Larry immediately, her hands shaking with rage and betrayal compounded. He read them with mounting fury, his wolf barely contained. Jerry wasn't just a traitor to Dana, he was an enemy of the crown. Larry dispatched William and a team of elite guards to find him. The punishment for conspiracy against royal succession was execution, and Larry intended to deliver it personally. Meanwhile, Elder Watson's investigation into Dana's background had taken an unexpected turn. His investigators had recovered her meager possessions from the orphanage, the few items she'd carried with her through foster homes and temporary placements. Most of it was worthless: worn clothing, a child's drawings, a single stuffed toy. But there was one item that made Elder Watson's heart stop: a ring, small and tarnished, strung on a fraying cord, as if Dana had worn it around her neck as a child. The design was unmistakable: a crescent moon cradling a wolf's profile, the ancestral symbol of the Watson bloodline. More specifically, it was the ring Elder Watson had given to his own daughter, Alara, on her 16th birthday. Weeks before, she'd disappeared during the territory wars. 30 years ago, he'd believed Alara dead. The entire pack had mourned her loss. But if this ring was in Dana's possession, if she'd carried it since childhood, then the impossible was true. Alara had survived long enough to have a child. Dana wasn't just some random orphan. She was his granddaughter, the daughter of the heir he'd lost and mourned for 3 decades. The revelation was devastating. Dana was royal blood, legitimate Watson lineage, which made her marriage to Larry a political alliance of the highest order. The heir she carried would unite 2 of the kingdom's most powerful bloodlines. Everything Elder Watson had schemed for, every attempt to discredit her, had been working against his own family's interests. But revealing this truth would require admitting terrible sins. He'd stopped searching for Alara after 2 years, declared her legally dead to avoid succession complications. He'd allowed his own granddaughter to grow up orphaned, suffering in foster care, exploited by wolves like Kathleen, while he'd lived in wealth and power, mere territories away. The shame was unbearable. More than that, if Dana learned her true heritage, she'd have independent political power. She wouldn't need Larry's protection or Elder Watson's approval. She'd be a threat to his carefully maintained control over the council. So Elder Watson made a choice that would haunt him. He pocketed the ring, buried the investigation reports, and said nothing. The secret of Dana's royal blood would remain hidden. She would continue believing herself a common orphan, vulnerable and controllable, at least until the truth inevitably surfaced. And when it did, the cost of his silence would be catastrophic. Chapter 7: Birth and Unspoken Vows. The labor lasted 14 hours, and Larry refused to leave Dana's side for even a moment. He held her hand through every contraction, his alpha strength anchoring her when the pain became overwhelming. The palace healers worked with practiced efficiency, but it was Larry's presence, his steady voice, his unwavering support, that carried Dana through the most terrifying experience of her life. When their daughter finally entered the world, her first cry was strong and fierce. The head healer placed the infant in Dana's arms, and the entire world narrowed to that single, perfect moment. The baby had Dana's delicate features and Larry's striking silver blonde hair, her eyes already showing hints of alpha gold. She was beautiful, healthy, and utterly theirs. Renee. They'd chosen the name together. During the long, quiet nights of Dana's final trimester, it meant reborn, a new beginning for both of them. A family built from the ashes of betrayal and political scheming. Dana cradled her daughter, tears streaming down her face. and felt something inside her chest finally, completely heal. This was what she'd always wanted. Not the grand palace or the crown or the political power, just this. A baby who needed her, a family that was truly hers, belonging that couldn't be taken away. Larry watched them with an expression of such profound love that it made Dana's heart ache. He reached out tentatively, and she placed Renee in his arms without hesitation. The mighty Alpha King, feared across every territory, held his tiny daughter like she was made of moonlight and dreams. His hands, gentle and trembling slightly. The overwhelming joy of motherhood solidified something Dana had been fighting for months. She loved him, not because of the mate bond or political necessity, but because of who he'd proven himself to be. Protective without being controlling, powerful without being cruel, vulnerable enough to share his burdens and strong enough to carry hers. This family, unexpected and born from betrayal, had become the only thing that mattered. But the mate bond remained formally unclaimed. They lived as mates, raised their daughter together, shared chambers and midnight conversations, and the intimate knowledge of each other's deepest fears. Yet the ceremonial bonding had never been completed. That final, sacred ritual that would bind their souls permanently. It existed in painful limbo between political necessity and genuine feeling. And Dana didn't know if Larry truly wanted her, or was simply honoring fate's demand. The kingdom celebrated Renee's birth, with festivals and gifts from every territory. The succession was secured, the bloodline continued, the future guaranteed. But in the quiet moments between official celebrations, Larry found himself planning something the kingdom would never demand, something personal and terrifying. He watched Dana with Renee, saw the fierce maternal love that transformed her, from the frightened orphan he'd first met, into a woman of breathtaking strength. He watched her navigate court politics with unexpected cunning, defend their daughter from subtle threats with protective fury, bloom into the queen she'd been meant to become. And he realized he couldn't continue like this, bound by fate, but not by choice, connected by duty, but not by freely given vows. The mate bond was sacred, but it was also a chain. If Dana had never truly chosen it, she'd been sold, trapped, forced into this life, through betrayal and circumstance. Larry began preparing a proposal, not as king to subject, not as alpha to omega, but as Larry Davies to Dana Murray, the woman he'd come to love beyond destiny's demands. He'd offer her a choice she'd never truly been given: stay or leave, complete the bond or dissolve it, choose him freely, or walk away with their daughter, and enough wealth to live independently forever. Because real love, he'd finally understood, required freedom, and if she chose to leave, it would destroy him. But she deserved that choice. Chapter 8. Silver and Secrets. The grand hall blazed with torchlight and celebration. Renee's naming ceremony had drawn nobles from every territory, all gathered to witness the formal presentation of the kingdom's heir. Dana stood beside Larry at the ceremonial altar, their daughter cradled in her arms, wrapped in the precious blanket Dana had carried since childhood, her only possession from her unknown past. The ceremony proceeded perfectly until Casey Nell stepped forward. Her voice rang out sharp, stopping the ritual mid-blessing. She invoked her right to formal challenge, demanding the court's attention. The hall fell silent. Ancient law protected a challenger's right to speak. Casey challenged Dana's fitness to be queen. Her arguments were methodical and damning. Dana's common blood polluted the royal lineage. Her orphan status suggested shameful parentage linked to criminals or rogues. Her sudden pregnancy reeked of conspiracy. She demanded a formal investigation before Renee could be legally recognized as legitimate heir. But Elder Watson, trapped by his own guilty knowledge, intervened. The mate bond was sacred law. The pregnancy had been verified. Dana's heritage couldn't override fate's choice and biological reality. The challenge had no legal merit. Other council members agreed. Casey's challenge was denied, and that's when Casey snapped. Years of calculated planning, decades of positioning herself as rightful queen, all destroyed by an orphan. Nobody. If she couldn't have Larry, no one would. She produced the forbidden weapon so fast, even William's guards couldn't react. A silver pistol, illegal and deadly, smuggled under layers of spelled concealment. Casey aimed directly at Larry's heart and fired 3 times. The silver bullets hit with devastating precision. Larry collapsed, blood spreading across the ceremonial floor in crimson and silver poison. The court erupted into chaos. Screams, guards rushing forward, nobles scattering in panic. Dana's anguish screamed her through the hall. She dropped to her knees, Renee clutched against her chest. The baby's blanket fell away, tangling around Dana's arms as she desperately tried to stop Larry's bleeding. That's when Elder Watson saw it. The blanket's torn edge revealed something sewn into the lining, a small ring tarnished and ancient, the crescent moon and wolf profile catching torchlight, the same ring he'd hidden in his study. He staggered forward, voice hoarse with shock. Where did Dana get that blanket? Dana barely heard him, focused on Larry's labored breathing. It was hers, the only thing from her past. Her father said her mother wrapped her in it before she died. Elder Watson pulled the matching ring from his pocket with trembling hands. With the court watching, Larry dying, there was no hiding anymore. He confessed it all. The ring belonged to his daughter Alara, lost 30 years ago. If Dana carried it, then the devastating truth was undeniable. Dana was his granddaughter, daughter of his lost heir, who'd survived long enough to give birth before disappearing forever. The revelation exploded through the hall. Dana was Watson bloodline, legitimate nobility. Renee was legitimate royalty on both sides. Her claim absolutely unquestionable. But none of it mattered to Dana. She knelt in Larry's blood, clutching their daughter, begging him not to die, while silver poison spread through his veins, and the truth of her stolen heritage shattered around her. Chapter 9. 3 Vows. Larry survived, though the healers called it miraculous. Silver poisoning should have killed an alpha within hours, but something held him anchored to life. The mate bond, they said, strengthened by Dana's desperate will, refusing to let him go. She'd stayed beside him for 3 days and nights, her hand pressed over his heart, whispering fierce commands that he couldn't leave her, couldn't leave Renee, couldn't abandon the family they'd built from betrayal and fate. His alpha healing finally overcame the poison on the 4th day. When his eyes opened, the first thing he saw was Dana's exhausted, tear-stained face, and his first words were an apology for scaring her. Keishi's trial was swift and merciless. The werewolf courts showed no leniency. For assassination attempts against the Alpha King, she was sentenced to permanent exile with her wolf bound, a magical punishment that severed her connection to her wolf soul, leaving her essentially human. She'd live, but she'd never shift again, never feel the moon's call, never be part of pack life. For a wolf, it was a fate worse than death. She was escorted beyond the kingdom's borders, with the understanding that returning meant immediate execution. But the more complex reckoning came with Elder Watson. He stood before the court, before his newly discovered granddaughter, and the weight of his sins finally broke him. He confessed everything: how he'd stopped searching for Alara after 2 years, declared her dead to avoid succession complications, allowed his own granddaughter to grow up orphaned and exploited, while he'd lived in wealth and power, mere territories away. He'd hidden the truth even after discovering it, choosing political control over family, power over blood. The confession was devastating and cleansing. Dana listened with tears streaming down her face, grieving for the grandmother she'd never known, for the family connection stolen by pride and ambition. But she also saw his genuine anguish, the old wolf destroyed by guilt and regret. She couldn't forgive him easily. That would take years, maybe a lifetime, but she could allow him the chance to earn redemption, to know his great-granddaughter Renee, to rebuild what his choices had destroyed. 2 weeks after Larry's recovery, he made his move, not in the throne room before the court, but in the private gardens, where Dana often took Renee for morning walks. He found them there, beneath the ancient oak, Dana, singing softly to their daughter, sunlight catching in her hair and making her look like something from legends, a queen who'd claimed her crown through strength rather than birthright. Larry knelt before her, and his words held no political calculation, no alpha command. He asked Dana Murray, not as the Alpha King to his fated mate, not as a bond demanded by destiny, but as Larry Davies to the woman he'd come to love, beyond all fate's designs, to marry him freely, to complete the mate bond, not because sacred law required it, but because she chose it, to rule beside him, not as subject, but as equal, to choose the family they'd built together, from the wreckage of betrayal and conspiracy. Dana looked at him, this powerful king who'd protected her, defended her, offered her freedom even when it terrified him, and realized she was no longer the desperate orphan sold as a surrogate. She was a queen who'd found her heritage, claimed her power, and learned that real family wasn't about blood or destiny. It was about choice, trust, and the courage to be vulnerable. She accepted with 3 vows, spoken before their daughter and the moon goddess herself. As mates, bound by fate's recognition. As spouses, chosen freely with open hearts. And as parents, forever connected through the child, who'd been born from destiny, but raised in love. The kingdom celebrated their true bonding ceremony, with joy that transcended politics. And in the years that followed, Dana and Larry would rule as equals, 2 wolves who'd found each other in the darkest circumstances, and chosen, against all odds, to build something beautiful from the ashes.
If alpha intensity, soulmate sparks, and thrilling wolf world secrets are your jam, subscribe now so you don't miss it. Fresh episodes drop every day, and the twists will have you hooked from the first howl.